Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me for episode 1 of series 2. I'm your host, Richard Horvath. Today, my guest is author Colm Holland. Colm's a great guy. I hope you really enjoy this podcast and take something special away from his wise and powerful words. Hey, Colm, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Richard. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, not a problem at all. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm not worthy.
No. we're all worthy, or we're all unworthy. Take your pick, Richard. So either way, we're all the same.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's now, in all honesty, this podcast, in my mind, I've been so excited to actually speak to you. I've kind of been chomping at the bit all day thinking, and I know it's late that we're getting on now, but I've been thinking, I can't wait. This is one of the most sort of excited I've been to record a podcast with anybody. So that's why I'm so grateful for you.
I've been thinking about it all day as well. So that makes both of us.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So where do we start, Colm? Because there's so much to get through. There's so much to be able to talk to you about. I don't think we'll even be able to cram it all in today anyway, but we'll do our best. Colm, do you want to kind of just explain what your occupation is? I suppose is a good way of starting.
Yes. Well, somebody gave me a name for my occupation, which I hadn't even thought of quite actually about 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to use that as a hook to hang my hat on. So they called me a professional alchemist.
Okay.
And
I can see why.
Yeah, and I was thinking, okay, a professional alchemist. First of all, what's an alchemist? A lot of people are going to say, okay, what's one of those? And then how do you make money out of it? I suppose would be the other side of it. So let me just tell you a brief story. I'm actually an author. I write, but I also speak quite a bit. If the audience listening, if you think of me as a sort of a cross between a motivational speaker and a sort of a spiritual guru, all kind of jumbled up together, but has also got a wicked sense of humor. That kind of sums me up, I think. So somewhere in there, and there's the origin of how I got to this point is really simple. So I used to be a publisher. I used to work 27 years ago for HarperCollins Publishers. I used to be in the Sydney office, and it was my job to receive all of the books that were being published by the company around the world. And they would come into my office, and it was my job to decide which of these manuscripts were going to become the books that we would also publish in Australia. Just to say, I'm actually now living back in the UK, but at the time I was in Sydney, and it was before email. Can you believe, guys? Amazing. There was a world before email, believe it or not.
Before internet, even.
Yes, yeah. We used to communicate with these things called faxes. Amazing. And those were great days because I had a personal assistant as well. I didn't have to do everything myself, but that's another story. You don't get personal assistants anymore unless you really.
No, you just get more work to do
just
yourself
more work
now.
to do. Okay.
Yeah.
So a pile of manuscripts lands on my desk, and I'm wading through them, and one just jumps out at me out of nowhere. It was a cover of a book, and the book was called The Alchemist. And it was by this guy that nobody has ever heard of before called Paulo Coelho. And I read the notes. The note said he's been published in Brazil. It was originally in Portuguese. We're going to be the first English language publisher. Have a read, Colm, and let us know how many copies do you think you'll want for the Australian market. This is my colleague. And the cover of the book was amazing. And if you Google the original cover of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, what you'll discover is that it was purple, and there's this shepherd boy, and there's this figure, the strange sort of figure dressed in Arab dress, Arabic dress, and he had a single eye on the forehead, which for those of you who know anything about religious and spiritual symbols, is the all-seeing eye of God.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. You know what? I'm going to break the rule. I'm going to take this home at the weekend. I can't play with the kids all weekend anyway, so I'll take this home and I'll take some time out. I'm going to read this. And I set myself up. I started to read the book in my backyard in Sydney. It was a beautiful day. I remember it really well, like it was yesterday almost. And I thought, well, I'll just do a skim, flip, 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 because I used to read a lot of books, so you can't read every word. But I didn't even get to skim the first page. I was sucking in every single word, and I didn't stop until I got to the very last page. On the Monday morning, I rang my colleague in San Francisco and I said, Greg, I said, I want to talk to you about The Alchemist. He said, I've only just got up. It's 7 a.m., man. I haven't even had a coffee yet. I said, look, I don't care. Forget about everything else today. Let's talk about The Alchemist. And he said, what? I said, I want 200,000 copies. He said, are you
Wow.
drunk? I mean, I might order normally, even on some really popular books, which I won't mention, but I might have ordered 2,000, 3,000. I mean, 5 would have been outlandish. And here's me coming in saying, I want 200,000. And he said, well, that ain't going to happen. But okay, let me talk to everybody else. Let's see what we come up with. And he said, why? I said, have you read it? And he said, yes. I said, I just know, Greg, just trust me on this. This is going to be a global bestseller. And he said, well, you've never said that before. So, okay, I'm listening. I'll go and talk to the others. We ended up, I think I got something like 20,000 copies for Australia. We sold those out within the first day. I think the bookshops had already, the pre-orders sold out. It actually has sold now more than 85 million copies over the last
Yeah.
27 years. It's been translated into 70 languages. There's only one book in the whole on the planet that's actually sold more by a living author. And I guess some people are thinking, well, what's that? What's that? Of course, it's J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So the
Which is
two,
related to alchemy.
well, there you go. The two best-selling books of all time in English are both about alchemy. So that got my attention. But so I was right, which was lovely. And Paolo started to gain popularity. It didn't happen immediately overnight, but the first 6-8 months, things were picking up really nicely. We invited him over to Australia to speak at a literary festival. And he
Yeah.
was really quite nervous because English is not his first language. But we said, no, it'll be fine. They're going to love you. Well, there was a queue around the block in Adelaide with people holding the book, waiting to get copies signed. I don't think he could believe it. And we were blown away by the response. And he said, I'm going to come back via Sydney, and I want to take you, Colm, and your PR manager. I want you guys to come out with a meal, just us and my wife, because I want to thank you for believing and having the vision for my book, because you guys are kind of the first that have really believed in this. And I was over the moon. It was great. No author's ever done that, actually. Even some
Yeah, so
big
just to
famous.
not jump in too soon, but
Yeah.
just to put it into context, I want to pick up on the fact that actually this book wasn't a success from the offset.
No,
Paolo actually published this book quite early on, and it was, in his own words, a flop.
it was. So I'm going to pick you up on that comment, Richard, because that's really leads into what I'm about to tell you,
Yeah.
which is we went to a restaurant and Paolo gave my PR manager a present. It was a little ring box, and she opened it, and it was a diamond dress ring.
Lovely.
It wasn't
What a
cheap,
gift.
trust me.
No.
We were, and she burst into tears. We all clapped. It was like she deserved it. She's awesome. And then he looked at me, and I was thinking, oh, and he said, Colm, I've got a gift for you. And I said, oh, okay, great. I was thinking, yeah, gold Rolex. That'd be nice. That shows you how shallow. You weren't expecting that, everybody, were you? You ever think it was going to be something super spiritual? Well, it was. because he looked me in the eye and he said, I've asked God and the universe and my wife what I should give you, and they've all told me I should do a day of my magic just on your behalf. Now, just before he said that, he had been saying that when the book came out initially in Portuguese in Brazil, it sold so badly the publisher gave him the rights back.
Wow.
So that tells you, like he washed his hands of it and said, look, I'm sure somebody else might be able to do a better job than this. Well, what was really interesting is that Paulo was, at the time, he had been involved in an occult form of alchemy and had been ripped off and burned by people who just wanted his money. He'd
Okay.
gone down the road of black magic, and
Mm.
he, in his own words, his life was a catastrophe and a real disaster. And he and his wife decided to go out into the Mojave Desert in Nevada. And what was really interesting about that, and the story of that is in another book of his called The Valkyries. If you're interested in what happened in that desert, then The Valkyries is a great read.
I'll definitely pick that one up because I've read The Alchemist
Okay.
only recently prior to this interview.
Okay.
And I mean, I won't go into too much because you're still telling the story, but it
Yeah.
really resonated with a lot of parts of my life. And the story we will also talk about because it's not what you would see as like a self help book,
Not so.
but it very much does speak to you in that way.
Okay.
But
So
yeah,
this
please
is
carry
coming
on.
to a point. This is the point. In the desert, he did what he calls spiritual alchemy, and he called on the universe in various ways. And if you're interested how he does it, it's all in the book.
Hmm.
To overcome a block that he believed was stopping the success of his book. And I want to mention this to everybody. I certainly have found this several times in my career and life. There's a block that you just can't identify, that you just can't quite think, well, I know things could be going better, and it's very easy to blame circumstances and the economic conditions. I mean, particularly right now, it's super easy to blame all that. But
Sure.
is that the block, or is it something in me?
Mm.
And what he discovered was that he had a real fear of being successful.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I've mentioned this to lots of people, especially that have been in the media. I mean, I had a massive media career, which I'll talk about in a moment. But anyway, going back, so he told me that he'd been in the desert and he did his magic, and that he gave the book. He put the book out again to publishers back in Brazil. Somebody picked it up, and what they said to him was exactly what I said, which is the hairs went up on the back of his neck, and he just had to publish the book. And it sold about
Mm.
500,000 copies, and then it landed on my desk, and I had exactly the same reaction. What Paolo said to me is that before he did his magic in the desert, nobody had that response to the book. And
Yeah.
now 86 million people, probably double that globally, would say, yes, that book really resonated with me. I've found it. It's just a simple story. But let me just tell you one last thing. What Paolo did when he gave me that gift, when he said, I've asked God what to give you, the gift was a day. He did do a day of that magic, the same magic that he did on his book. He said he had done for me, so that whatever I wanted would come to pass. I just
Yes.
needed to decide what I wanted.
Mm.
And I just have taken that, everybody, as my mantra that I believe all of us can take. And it's something we all can face at any given moment in our time. First of all, we know we want something better. We want to be a better version of ourselves, for example.
Yes.
We know we want to move beyond the things that seem to be hindering us either emotionally or professionally or creatively. There's so many different ways that we can feel blocked. And one of the issues that I discovered in my life, and I write about this in my book, The Secret of the Alchemist, which is why we're talking today, Richard, and
Yep.
and that is what I say here is that just listening to your heart again, rediscovering your dreams and ambitions, the ones that you've pushed down and hidden or buried or given up on because of something somebody said, or because you got no encouragement, or because your own self-esteem just didn't have the confidence or the courage to act upon it. After that evening, something happened for me to the point that I went from being a pretty miserable middle manager for working in a very large publishing company on not great wages, I have to say, to within 6 months, I had left. And within 2 years, I founded and ran the second largest digital advertising agency in Australia with 85 staff. We ran the Sydney Olympics 2000 online. We ran Channel 7 TV online. We ran Toyota distributors online. How? And I used to look at myself in the mirror and I would go, what are you doing here?
Yeah, and it genuinely is magical.
Exactly.
And magic is always seen as not real, but just from these words that Paolo said to you,
Mm-hmm.
something truly did happen. And there's so much to pick up on what you've just said
Okay.
at this point. And one thing I want to do actually is define alchemy, which is historically is the study of transmutation of matter, and I'm reading this because I didn't know this myself, particularly in base metals, in the attempt to convert them to gold. Now, what I got from the alchemist, so an alchemist is a person that practices alchemy, was that actually this wasn't so much about the historical side of it. This was more about converting your base self
Mm-hmm.
into an extraordinary version of it, which is what you did there in that period of 2 years, which is, I suppose, what Paolo was doing while he was doing this magic
Mm-hmm.
to put onto you. This book, as you mentioned, it's just resonates. It resonates with me. It's resonated with so many people, including celebrities such as Madonna, Oprah Winfrey, Will Smith, Pharrell Williams. And there's something in it, as you said. It's a simple book. It's a simple story of a shepherd who, called Santiago, he has a reoccurring dream, which is, I suppose, what sets him on his journey to realizing his personal legend and finding the treasure of what he's been dreaming of.
Yes.
So both sides of alchemy are actually in this book, are written in this book.
They are.
But for me, the chapters and the stories along the way, I was hearing and I was thinking of times in my life where certain things have happened. And one of the biggest things is situations what come up where you think it's a coincidence, but it actually isn't.
Yes.
There's reason into that quote unquote coincidence.
Yes.
Many a time I've had things happen myself, and I'm even going to tell a quick story about something that happened recently, actually in the last week or so. So we've looked at a house to buy, and as it so happens, so we're looking at this house online, and I've got a friend who's a personal trainer. He's been doing Zoom calls, Zoom online training, and he said to me, why don't you come on one of these training sessions with me? Come on one of these workouts. He says, I won't charge you. He says, we're good friends. Just come on it. And I'm like, I've seen these been going on for weeks and weeks now. Though even Joe Wicks has been doing them in the mornings and things like that. And I do go to the gym a lot, and I do miss the gym. So I thought, do you know what? Yeah, let's do it. So I do the workout. So it just so happens that he invites me at this point. It just so happens that we finish the workout, and there's 16 people on this call. Now it just so happens that I decide to stay on because he was asking how I am, and I was talking back to him, and he couldn't hear me. And then I realized that I was on mute, so everybody was dropping off the call, and I thought, I'll unmute myself and I'll have a conversation with him. So I unmuted myself, and everybody had left by this point, and it was just me and my friend Aaron. And we just got to talking. I was asking him how he's doing, how the business is going. Now we're in lockdown. It's not easy for a personal trainer. And, just general chit chat. And just at the end of the call, I mentioned to him that, oh, by the way, I'm going to have a look at a house tomorrow that we're looking to buy. We really like it. And it just so happens that one of the people on that workout worked for the estate agents that was advertising this house. And he said, oh, is it is it with Hannells? I'll say the estate agent's name. I don't see where it matters. He says, it was Hannells. I said, yeah. He said, is it in Alveston? I said, yeah. He went, oh, you know that Heather, who was on the call, she works there. And I said, no way. I said, what a coincidence. And he says, yeah. He says, I tell you what, I'll text her after this. I'll tell her to put a good word in or look after you kind of thing. And I was like, all right, yeah, I appreciate that. But I didn't know if it would be her that was showing us around the house. Well, lo and behold, the next day, my wife gets a call. Heather will be showing you around the house. So I send a text to Aaron. I said, Heather's showing us around the house. He said, oh, I'll send a text over. So we got to the house. Heather's like, oh, yeah, I know you anyway. I've seen you in the gym. I was like, all right, okay, that's brilliant. She said, yeah, Aaron told me you was coming. So as it happens, us and two other people really like this house, and we all put an offer in. Now, they asked us for a best and final offer. We all put the same amount in. But because Heather had put quite a good word in for us, and the people who were selling the house still had a lot of respect for the neighbours, they wanted to also base that on the people that were going to buy the house, which happens to be us. And
Congratulations.
also, thank you. And following this, our mortgage advisor happens to be named Ram. Now, out of all the names, Ram is a name that I've never come across. Now, we live in Derby, so I don't know if you know the history of Derby, but the Derby Ram is very significant. We've got the Rams, the football team.
Yep.
But what really, really freaked me out is that, do you know Ram as in, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but Regnus Agnus Mundi?
Yes, indeed. It's the type of alchemy that it's probably fictional. It's probably fictional, but it's the type of alchemy that Paolo has given the name to, and he's coined those initials. Yes.
So what a coincidence! And that was the whole point I was getting to.
That's amazing.
And yeah, it's what a story. And this has all been in very recent in the lead up to this conversation with you. And I've just been like, wow. And certain other things have happened in the past that I won't go into now, but it is all very much in line with things that I've read in the book and things that I've taken from the book. But what was more surprising was actually when I was reading your book. Now, your book is The Secret of the Alchemist, and you ever so beautifully go through the chapters, compare them to the things that you've done in your life, really go into depth about the meetings of the characters that Santiago has, unpick everything to beyond what I actually seen when I was first reading.
Yes. Well, there's a reason for that, because it was almost a retrospective study. The magic began to happen, and it was very similar to your experience, Richard. So that lovely story, and again, congratulations on getting the house. I hope you're really happy there. I'm sure you will be. But that kind of coincidence, quote unquote, is what is called in the Alchemist, and I talk about them quite a bit, is what Paolo calls an omen.
Yes.
Now we normally think of the omens, like a black cat walking across. Don't go there. Don't do this. Don't do that. But there is another name for this, which might be easier for some people. I call them signs. Yeah. And the reason I call them signs is because when you are pursuing your own transformation, when you've made a commitment to say, look, I actually want I want to live a much more fulfilled life than I am right now. What happens then? This is the real magic, everybody. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And I see it not just in my life, but dozens of people that have gone down this road. And that is that when you make that decision, when you make that commitment, there is this force that sits somewhere, don't ask me where, in the universe that we are connected to. And there was a guy called Carl Jung, Professor Carl Jung, a psychologist from the last century, who taught a lot about this to his clients. But there is this force that we're connected to almost through our unconscious mind. He called it the collective unconscious. Paolo calls it the soul of the world.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. we are not islands. We are not disengaged from each. We are all connected. Um, and one of the things that once you make that commitment to be a better person, be a better version of yourself, and I'll talk a bit more about what I mean by that. I don't want to mislead people on that. When we want to become our true self, shall we say, rather than the pretend or the front self that we try and present to the rest of the world for various reasons because we feel we have to. But when we commit to becoming our true self, as Paolo says, all the power and love in the universe conspires to help make that happen.
Yes,
And I've just
definitely.
seen it over and over and over again. Now, some people will say, and quite rightly so, I mean, I was Mr. Ultra Skeptic before this all started happening to me. And I wasn't, I was 40 years old,
Mm.
everybody. I mean, I wasn't, young. So I was a pretty hard bitten skeptic at this point in my life. But when this stuff, like happened to you, Richard, began to happen on such a regular basis, I just knew I was on the right track. So I just decided to carry on and delve deeper into what is this secret in The Alchemist. And that's where the title of my book came from, is I was hunting, I was digging. There's got to be something in this little story because it's only short. I mean, it's less than 200 pages. If
It is.
anybody's not a big reader and you want a great read, then The Alchemist is a good book to read.
It
But
was perfect for me. It was
yeah,
perfect.
yeah,
I'm not a huge reader,
yeah, you can
and I'm one of
finish it
these
in an
people.
afternoon easily.
Yeah, well, I'm one of these people that has to read over and over again, sometimes that same sentence or
Yeah,
that same line, because it doesn't sink in. Otherwise, I'm just actually reading a word. So that's what was great for me as well.
that's great. Yeah. So what I discovered was lots of things go into like a jigsaw puzzle that makes this little story so popular and why it's been so successful. And I won't
Mm.
go into them all now. If you're interested in them, there's the thing called the hero's journey, which is what George Lucas utilized when he wrote the Star Wars um, trilogy, the first trilogy. That was inspired by a guy called Joseph Campbell, who is one of the world's leading author, passed away now sadly, one of the world's leading authorities on the power of myth. So the Alchemist is a myth. It is a fable, but it's a fable with quite a lot of magic going on it. I I went into all this and I studied it and I started to make notes and I could feel this book brewing, The Secret of the Alchemist brewing, but I was really struggling. Kept saying to me, I'll wake up in the morning and go, do you know, I really don't feel I've yet found the secret. I mean,
Yeah,
why would this book, when there have been so many yarns written down through the centuries, why would this book in particular be so successful when so many have sold so few? And
mm.
it was I got a phone call one day. I was at my desk and I got a phone call from a guy called Wayne Dyer. And those of you that are into the self-help world will recognize the name Dr. Wayne Dyer. Well, I was publishing his book at the time. He rang me and he said, look, Colm, I just want to say one thing, if you don't mind. This new book of mine called Real Magic, could you do the same alchemy that you did on Paolo's book for me? And I was like, yeah, okay, Wayne. Yes, of course. I'll do my best. But the thing that shocked me about what he said was, could you Colm do the alchemy that you did for Paolo? And I
Right.
was thinking, well, I'd never thought of that. What does he mean, the alchemy I did for Paolo? And I was staring at Paolo's book on the desk, as I hung up the phone talking to Wayne, I actually realized that the title of his book is The Alchemist. And I just dived into the book and found every reference I could to the original ancient art of alchemy. And it's all there. The emerald tablet, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, all the terminology that the ancient alchemists used. And then it was just like this massive penny drop. The light went on. It was a eureka moment. And I realized that actually there is a power of, call it spiritual alchemy, if for the sake of giving it a name, You can't belong to it, by the way. This is not a religion. It's not a philosophy. There's no membership. You don't have to pay 10% of your salary to anybody. This is this is you can't join this. It's
No.
it's it's at the very bedrock of the universe itself.
Yeah.
It transcends all other forms of faith or whatever, but it doesn't contradict them. So there's lots of Hindu alchemists, there's lots of Muslim alchemists, and I talk about these in my book. So down through the centuries, people of various persuasion, male and female, have been alchemists and have discovered the fact that when you do begin to try and find your own true self and follow your personal legend, then you are tapping into this amazing power that can change your life, can change your circumstances, can change the way you feel, can change the way you behave, can change the ambitions that you have. And one of the things that I love most of all, in a way, about the power of alchemy is that it's all driven by something I call unconditional love. So
Yes.
the place that the true self lives is a place of immense strength. To love your neighbor as yourself requires strength. So the ability to not project anger when you feel anger rising up, not to project that onto those around you and hurt those around you, not to take it out, not to take your feelings of negativity about yourself out on those who you love, requires real courage and strength for many people.
Mm.
And that's what started me down the road of wanting to find my true self. I actually realized, it was very early on in life, long before I met Paolo, I actually did realize that there was something else pulling the strings of my emotions. I had no idea what it was. I just knew it was there, and I didn't like the way it did that, and I was getting more and more uncomfortable. It seemed the older I was getting, the more powerful it became. And so I did go and get help.
Okay.
And I was very fortunate, and I got help from quite a few people along the way. And part of that journey, looking back now, I realize that was my beginning of my path on the alchemist journey. So even though I
Right.
didn't call it alchemy at the time, I can see now looking back, and there was a pattern beginning to form. And you can imagine my amazement when I started to study ancient alchemy and then look at the alchemist and find it in the book, that the path that I had been traveling is in fact the alchemist journey. And it can be split really quickly into three main sections. The first section, the alchemist called the black phase, and another name for that was called mortification. And that's really where we've got to kill, we've got to die to the false self that we live day in
Yeah.
and day. So we think we've got to be brave when we're not. We don't feel brave. We think we've got to be Mr. Super, Superman or Mr. Superwoman, when we don't. That's the last thing we feel like, and we have this turmoil that goes on, and we struggle with it. And we go to bed at night. Sometimes we look in the mirror and we say, "If only I could just be the real me. If only if that was acceptable to the world." Well, trust me, everybody, it is. And
Yeah.
part of the process of finding your true self is to start to be really honest about what you feel, about who you are. And if you need help to deal with those things, then the strength is asking for the help.
Yeah, that's very powerful because, there's many people that do struggle to be themselves.
Yeah.
And I've been through it, and I'm sure all of us go through it at some point, and we do act up. We try to be a certain way, or we
Mm-hmm.
try to be how we see somebody that's cool or somebody that's really intelligent, and we're actually just forcing something instead of just being ourselves and allowing people to see us for who we are and love that. And
Yes.
I think that's one part of this story. What was great for me is that I felt like Santiago the shepherd, he represented me in so many ways because he shows so much He shows a naivety. He shows complacency, that kind of instinct to live in a familiar, a safe and comfortable
Hmm.
surrounding, but then also that will to want to be more, the hopes and aspirations that we have, and that kind of overwhelming inquisition to take a leap of faith and follow your dream. And within that, that's kind of then met with the obstacles that we have to overcome in life,
Yeah.
the questions of our inner fears, and can I really do this? Am I good enough? They set us back a little bit, and then throughout the story, he has to then reevaluate that. And then something that was a real good part of it, what I've experienced myself, is I've had a little bit of a setback, and then I've managed to get myself back on track through, I don't know, the power of belief again, was like the resurgence that he has, and that resilience that you sort of get from those hurdles and the mistakes, the hardships that actually make us stronger and then more equipped to face the battles ahead. So when I say that, I'm talking about where Santiago gets robbed, he's got no money, he absolutely gives up on his dream, and all he's doing is then thinking about getting some money to actually go back to his former life of being a shepherd again. Um, all these aspects of Santiago's life, I think we can all find somewhere in our own lives where we've experienced those feelings, those thoughts, and that's where it really resonated with me.
There's a there's a truism in everything you just
Mm,
said, Richard. And one of the things that I take away every day when I'm maybe experiencing those moments of self doubt, or I'm experiencing, that fear. I feel that fear creeping in of failure, maybe, or will this be good enough? All that stuff that we think about ourselves.
yeah.
The those are our that fear, those thoughts can become our friend,
Mm,
and they can become our friend because they're like indicators. They're like the litmus paper that tells us that something's not right. And if we do have the courage and the bravery, we can dig beneath that. And what we'll discover quite often is there's pain. Quite
yeah.
often we discover that there's a wound of some description, and none of us want to revisit wounds. None of us
No.
want to encourage pain, but actually, that pain, that wound, that self that we almost despise for being weak is actually our greatest strength. And
Yeah.
that's the secret of the lead that turns into gold. That's the metaphor of the alchemists. And so the white phase of the alchemist stages is when you get to that point and you can own your weakness, you can
Mm,
embrace your weakness, you can actually begin to let your own love, but also that love I was talking about in the universe earlier, to embrace. If you can let that universe, invite it in to 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 heal those wounds, to embrace that weakness, you will become one of the most powerful people you know, and
it's
you
really
will be
interesting.
shocked. You trust you. I had an inner child. I was telling you this on another occasion, Richard. I had an inner child, and
Yeah.
you often hear a psychiatrist talking about love your inner child. Well, who is this inner child? It's that child that was wounded when we were younger. It's the wounded self. It's that youngster. And I, without going into any real detail, I was a real life Harry Potter. I was shut in the cupboard for long periods of time. And some people probably said, "Oh, you probably deserved it." Maybe I did. But actually, my mother was epileptic. It was undiagnosed, and when I was a very small toddler, to protect me when she knew that a turn was coming on, she'd lock me in the cupboard to protect me. But you can imagine my confusion as a young boy. So I had to
Yeah.
grow up
Sure.
with that, and it really
Mm,
coloured the way I see relationships, and how my ability to trust other people's love was
yeah.
was handicapped, seriously handicapped by that. And by going through the alchemy process, by allowing myself to face all of that and to discover that, it's now become my greatest strength. And I often say to people, I'll say it now, the Colm Holland that you can hear talking now that you're listening to, um, that's a result of me loving my child. This is this vocal, courageous child that's talking,
Yeah.
and we all have that ability to dig within, to go within, make that journey, which is the alchemist journey. That's the journey that Santiago was on. He wasn't really going to the pyramids. What he was really doing was following um, the Arabian form of alchemy, which is what's so clever about the parable that Paulo has written. And without spoiling it for everyone, do you want to spoil it for everyone, Richard, who hasn't read The Alchemist? Should we tell them to close their ears just for a few moments?
Yeah. I think we'll call a spoiler alert because I
Yeah.
really want people to read this book because I want them
Okay.
to understand what we're talking about
Plug
if they
your
haven't
ears.
read it.
Okay. If you've not read the book, plug your ears now. But for those of you, we'll tell you when to unplug your ears. For those of you who have read it, of course, the treasure isn't at the pyramids. The treasure is back in the abandoned chapel where he was with his sheep, buried under the sycamore tree. Well, that's the completion of the circle.
Mm,
That is, having gone out into the world on the hero's journey and looking for the answers. Where do we end up back? We end up back with our true self. Only
yeah.
now we see ourselves as if for the first time, as T.S. Eliot said. You know, we look at this place as if we've never been here before because it's all new. And so my
And
book, The
it's
Secret of the Alchemist, was driven by my desire to just let people know that this can be true for them. Um, and if you know anybody listening today, if this is ringing bells with you, then I'm happy. You know, I've fulfilled my job, and so I guess going back to when somebody the other day called me a professional alchemist, yeah, this is what I do. I
yeah.
I try and be the alchemist for the people I come into contact with, and it's my desire, my certainly I think the universe's desire that we can all be that. Having found that power for ourselves, we can share that with other people, and together we can, you know, nourish the soul of the world. And boy, if there was ever a time when we need this, it's now. Um, things I've been around for a long time, many years, and I've been through lots of stuff. Even post-war Britain and so on. When the times were really tough. But I don't think I've ever known a time that's where it's tough for the soul, the
Yeah.
corporate
Yeah.
soul that we share, that collective unconscious, is certainly needs all of our effort right now to move on in a much more positive and a much more honest and truthful way. The things that are coming to light are just phenomenal. It's incredible what I'm seeing happening every day is more and more truth, stuff that people have been trying to hide for years and years about the way we run things and do things all over the world in different societies. It's all coming out. It's incredible what's
Yeah,
happening.
it's a very strange time, but it's a time that I've actually quite enjoyed. I know
Okay.
people have really hated it, but
Mm,
personally, because I've got two children who are very active, have hobbies outside of school and things like that. It's been nice to just sort of strip back and not have to be so busy. So straight from work, getting my son to football, getting my daughter to a cheerleading, and the swimming and everything else. In amongst all of that, it's kind of really been nice to have more time with the family.
mm,
I mean, maybe, and again, this is going back to omens and things, and I think it's how you see things and what you do with it, if you can be productive. So for me, I might not have done this podcast because I actually started it in this time. And it was always something in my head. But I think because it was a time where I felt that I did a podcast about 3 years ago. I started doing a podcast about 3 years ago, and I brought that to a close because I didn't have the time to do it anymore. I did it alone. It wasn't a guest based podcast, and I also felt like I was running out of material. So I thought I don't want to keep repeating myself, and it was pretty successful. But what I did with this podcast was I wanted to make it guest based. I wanted to have inspirational people on, people with great stories, people like yourself, and to get the people to come on might not have happened because they might have been too busy. For me to actually do this podcast, it might have been the same thing. So I've been productive in that way. As I said, I've been able to spend more time with the family. We've really, I think it brings out, it proves that how strong you are as a family unit and that you're meant to be together during these times. If you can all live together in one house when there's like four of you and you're sort of on top of each other, you're working together, you're learning together and everything else. And I mean, I've seen stories of celebrities that have broke up and said, oh, we'll look at our relationship after COVID. It's just too much that we're together all the time. And I think, well, if you can't live together now through this time and coexist, then it's never going to be right, is it? So personally, yeah, I've quite enjoyed it. But not to go off on a tangent too much, I wanted to talk a little bit more actually about Santiago again. And I wanted to go back and pick up on that white phase you spoke about, because that actually made me think of the part just after Santiago sort of lost his money. He was robbed. He had nothing. He started working at the crystal shop. Now, not to talk too much about the crystal shop, but he started cleaning it, and it was a way for him to get some money to buy sheep, to become a shepherd again. But after a period of time, almost a year, it had become very successful. Santiago had made enough money to actually realize that he can continue on his journey that he'd started. But when he leaves that shop, he's wearing white linen. And for me at that point, it was like almost representative of virginity or a purification, a fresh start. It, is that the white phase as well?
It is the white phase. No, you've said it very eloquently, Richard. I don't have much to add except, no, brilliant. When I go through that in my book, what it reflects both for Santiago in his quest and for most people is that what the universe wants to do, what love wants to do, is actually make us shine. Believe it or not, I know everything quite often in the way we're brought up and the way we're treated when we're growing up. It's like, oh, you mustn't shine, you mustn't stand out, you mustn't think you're above your station in life, whatever. Crazy. Why do we do that? Why do we say that to our kids?
Yeah,
That's
it's so true. And
what are we trying to do with that? Because we're going to have those kids are going to have to undo that now. You have to spend the rest of their life undoing that. And nobody likes somebody who's always bragging and somebody who's always trying to push their ego out there and all. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is, I meet people day in, day out. Everyone I meet is extraordinary. There is something unique and extraordinary and wonderful about everybody, all of us. It's this whole celebrity cult that we've grown with. It's been around forever. It's not nothing really new. It's because we don't think that of ourselves that we project that onto these people, and we almost live out that expectation of that we can't ourselves on them, and that's so sad because that could be us. We
yeah,
could
and
we could be living like that.
what's that really great about what you just said there is about, like I mentioned earlier, am I good enough? You always, there's something sort of deep rooted that within all of us that we always question ourselves if we're good enough. Now, when I read your book, it was more towards the end of the book, you spoke about a sales role.
Yes.
And how that you didn't have experience in that role, and not to go into depth about that sales role, or spoil the book, but it's kind of one of this. What rang true to me is that, right, my background is I grew up on a council estate. I've always seen myself as a sort of a council estate boy. I got into a job at quite a young age working with my brother-in-law, which was I could call luck or coincidence, or I could say maktub. So if you don't know what that means, listeners, then read The Alchemist. But it is basically a way of, I was an engineer, and I actually got to a point where I was comfortable in that role. I was really confident at what I was doing, and I got up to a sort of lead engineer, project manager status, but it was still kind of related. It was still quite hands on, and quite recently I got asked to take on a more sales role. Now, this was where my insecurities started coming out. Me, how can I do this? I'm not cut out for this. I've never been sales. Now, I am technical, so I have something to offer there, but it's a very scary prospect because you know the risks. You know that sales roles are based on selling. It's all about bringing revenue in. If I don't bring revenue in, then I'm going to lose this job. And I never had that faith in myself that I could do it because coming from that council estate background, I don't speak. I always think to myself, I don't speak very well. I don't speak as beautifully as my mentor and my manager speaks. And I listened to him, and I was saying to him, like, I can't do this. I'm not you. I said, I'm raw. And in one of the things that he said to me is like, your rawness is perfect. He says, you're a diamond in the rough. You just need shaping a little bit, but don't change who you are. And those words, they stick with
So
me now, and
wise.
I take them
Hmm.
with me into everything that I do. And it proved true because I went to a meeting with some really high up people for a business that we were presenting to, for some work that we were looking to take on, and we was up against other companies, and it kind of fell to me sort of accidentally, but I had prepared myself a little bit with a presentation. But I think what they really liked about me is that I was just really honest and I was really myself, and they knew that, pardon my French, there was no bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's really worked for me. And if it wasn't for those words that Lee told me, then I would have just been so nervous at that point. I would have been so insecure and had no faith in myself. As much as of a positive guy that I am, and always feel like, I'm very competitive and I always feel like I can do well or do better. Being in these kinds of situations where you feel like you've got no experience and you shouldn't be there is very daunting. And lots of people will go through that. And that was very similar to what I read of you in your book.
Yes. There's a just on this point. Lee is an alchemist. At that moment, Lee was an
Mm,
alchemist to you. If that
mm,
helps people understand what we're saying here,
I
so
love that.
so that pearl of wisdom that that enabled you to understand your worth. I couldn't have put it better. That's marvelous. This is the thing. I in my book right at the very beginning of the book, I say one thing, and I'll just quickly read it, and that
Mm,
is that the greatest challenge we face is to truly believe, at the very core of our heart, that we are loved unconditionally, which means without any demands, just for who we are, and not for what we can do. And I've found in my life, and I see this so many times in people I know, and that is that we think we've got to achieve to be something.
mm.
It's the opposite. Once we learn to just be, then we can achieve.
Yes.
It's the antithesis of what we do every day. And there's a fabulous song by Paul Simon. I'm a big fan of, remember Simon and Garfunkel. Those of you who are old enough to remember who they are. Um, um, he wrote just a song, one of his later pieces called "Quiet," and it just says this, and it just what you said just rang some bells with me. He said in the song, the lyrics are, "And when they say that you're not good enough, well, the answer is you're not." But who are they, or what is it that eats at what you've got with the hunger of ambition for the change inside the purse? They are handcuffs on the soul, my friends, handcuffs on the soul and worse.
That's
So
beautiful.
the ambition that's driven by our lack of self-worth, it's so that we can feel we can achieve self-worth,
Yeah.
is our handcuffs.
Mm,
And how many times do we want to shake those? We wanted to shake those handcuffs off of ourselves. So the white phase enables you, in the story of Santiago and in my life, I discovered going through the white phase is that period of time when you say, I am worthy just because I'm me. I don't
Yeah.
have to prove myself. I don't have to become something. And the irony is, every time in my life that I've ever gone through and I've come to that point, amazing things happen.
Yeah. I really believe
Success
that.
happens. New relationships occur. My life feels enriched in some way. And yet, if I strived and strived and toiled and worked and sweated and blood and so on, I mean, there is some work involved in this, but it's not the kind of work that we normally think we have to do to just win that own self-worth. Sometimes we're
Yeah.
trying to win the approval of that parent or that teacher or that peer group who didn't give us the approval we felt we needed at one time. There's lots of things that can make us behave in that way. But the moment we can say, I am who I am and I'm loved for who I am, that's such a freeing. And that's where Santiago was in the crystal shop. He
Mm.
he realized, and the metaphor of cleaning the glass, the crystal glass, is really lovely because the crystal glass, one of the biggest components of that is lead. So in the
Yeah.
metaphor of the alchemist, he's cleaning the lead and it's becoming gold in that sense. And then there is a final stage. I realize we're getting near to our end of time, but the red phase is the third phase of the alchemist process. And these
Yeah.
are all named after things that used to happen in the laboratory, by the way. If you're wondering where the colors come from, it's all part of the metaphor of the laboratory. And the
Yeah.
chemicals and the substances would change color from black to white to red. Red means that we can begin to perform miracles. We can begin to work magic in
Mm.
our life and for the benefit of those around us. Um, the red, in a sense, is the period of when we're entering into that phase of true empowerment,
Yeah.
when the power that we're bringing is a power that exists because we've found a way to connect to that power in the universe. So I know it's cliche to say, may the force be with you. I mean, we've all joked, about that. It's easy to joke about it, but actually, many a true word is said in jest because
Yeah.
that force is real. And I feel sorry. My heart goes out to anybody listening who doesn't know that force in their life because almost for me, my life would not be complete now without that. I mean, something happened yesterday and today, which I cannot even begin to tell you how magical, what magic has happened just for me. Just even though, and I'm in shock. Even when it happens, whether it's buying a house like for you, um, you know, things like that, or a major breakthrough in your career, I still I said to
Yeah.
somebody
You're still
today,
shocked by it, even though it's something that you understand.
exactly. I
Um,
mean, after
that's
when this
the
stuff
universe
happens,
conspiring
when magic
to help you.
happens,
Mm.
it's and it's magic is that your ego doesn't go blow up, and you suddenly become, this inflated ego. It's magic when you feel about half an inch tall, because you realize that you are so small in comparison to the immense generosity of the universe.
Yeah.
The universe just
Definitely.
gives and gives and goes on giving, and it will go on giving way beyond our time here on earth. So why not enjoy it now? that's that's
That's
what I
exactly true.
decided. Why
Yeah.
wait for something that may or may not later,
Exactly.
whenever that might be? Why not just take it, grasp life by the horns and get get out of it now what you're meant to, what we're all meant to receive. And I've some of my best friends, or one friend in particular, has been severely disabled, severely disabled most of her life. And every time I want encouragement, every time I want to be inspired, every time I just, I may be feeling a bit down on myself, all I have to do is ring her,
Mm.
because she is just the epitome of somebody who against all the odds, has embraced life and love, and is so generous with her love. She always brings me to tears. So I'm not, again, I'm not here talking about, we've got to go down the gym and pump ourselves up, and we've got to be Mr. Superman, or we've got to be Mr. Super Mum, and we've got to be everything to everybody. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an inner strength, an inner joy, an inner fulfillment that can be ours, whatever our situation.
Yeah, no, it's beautifully said. And yeah, I just like what you were saying there about life. Grab it and grasp every opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
and run with it, because even just being here, and as cliche as this sounds, it is actually a miracle that we're even here now. It's a miracle to be born when you look at the statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there was a couple of things that you said about loving yourself, self-worth, and finding all that. Well, I actually did a podcast with somebody called Victoria Kleinsman, and she does
Yes.
that for a living. She's all about uh, body positivity and self-love, and she's very much centered around the female audience, because she's been there, and she's been had the ups and downs. She's experienced certain things in that, and she has found her happiness at just being who she is. Now, what's great about this is her husband, or future husband, so her fiance, is actually an entrepreneur. And now I messaged him whilst I was reading The Alchemist, because he actually did a TED talk, and we were talking about this on the podcast that I did with him. His name's Walter Kleinsman. Now, one of the things that happened with him, which is extraordinary for reading this book, and then after I'd spoken to him, so I came back to it. It was that he needed some clarity in his life. He was doing well, successful. He had a lot of money. He'd had a relationship that had broken down, but he just wasn't happy in his life. And he made a decision to go away, to take a break, take a vacation on his own, which is not something that a lot of people do. Now, could you guess where he decided to go on his vacation?
Not North Africa by any chance.
Egypt,
Yes.
yes. He wasn't looking for the pyramids, but he
Mm.
picked a nice resort, and he wanted to just read and just have a clear mind and just enjoy some alone time, and find himself again. Now, what magically happened for him on this trip, this vacation, is he found his treasure. And his treasure was Victoria, who happened to be over there with a friend after coming out of a horrible relationship, an abusive relationship. She was taking some time away, enjoying herself, and he found his treasure in Egypt, and which who is Victoria. And I just thought, when I was reading the book about Santiago, I thought, that's Wouter. And I texted him, and he said, yes, I found my treasure in Egypt. It's a beautiful story, and they're
That's
both
great.
such lovely people, so down to earth, and I just, all of these things kind of come together. Now, do you know what? There's one thing I wanted to ask you. Now, you said Lee was my alchemist. Your meeting with Paolo,
Mm.
the dinner that you had together. Would you say Paolo was your, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but Melchizedek, or was he an alchemist in your story?
I Well, it's my interpretation, and we'll all have our Melchizedeks, and we'll all have our excuse me, alchemists during our life.
Mm,
I would say he was the alchemist, and
mm,
I'll say that because um, I was the alchemist will appear. Maybe we should just mention who Melchizedek is. Melchizedek is a messenger of God. So
mm,
Melchizedek is a go-between between us and the divine, the go-between between us and love. And if you've never experienced the kind of unconditional love that we're all talking about here, then you need to ask a Melchizedek to come into your life. That's somebody who will talk to you and help you make that transition to experiencing love. The alchemist's job is really later in the story.
yeah,
The alchemist's job is that when you've made progress, when you've learned these things, um, there is this thing in alchemy, and this is the red phase. There is this thing in alchemy that you then have to make a shift, a paradigm shift of consciousness. And many of the world's religions and many of the people I hear talking about meditation and yoga and lots of other things, it's all fabulous stuff, and I highly recommend it. But one of the things I don't hear them saying is that there is a consciousness shift. Even when you think you're enlightened, there is another level, and it is the level that belongs to alchemists. It's that level where you can actually perform magic. And now, in the story of Santiago, he faces yet another capture by bandits in the desert who again steal all his money. So it's not like all his trials and tribulations are over. This is even after the crystal shop. But he's with the alchemist, and the chieftain who's robbed them says, "I'm going to keep your jewels. I'm going to keep your gold, and I'm going to kill you unless you can give me a decent reason why I shouldn't do that." And the alchemist says, "Well, this young man," looking at Santiago, "he is an alchemist. Not I'm an alchemist." He says, "He's an alchemist, and he can turn himself into the wind." So I have this little image of this little wet puddle appearing in the sand between Santiago's feet at that moment. So it's either I turn myself into the wind or we're all going to die.
Yeah. And I love the part where he actually says, where he mentions it, and he says, why have you said that? Like, we're going to die. I can't do this. And the alchemist says, I'm not going to die. I can turn myself into the wind.
Yes.
I thought that was brilliant. So then he really is on his own.
He's totally on his own. Absolutely. And so that's a great passage to read. And I draw on that. So towards the end of my book, where I'm talking about the red phase and what it means to make that shift, that new paradigm shift. So in the metaphor in the story is that your life depends on it in a metaphorical way, that you can get so far in life, but if you really want the treasure, the real gold, then you have to make this final move. And that's where the real power of alchemy comes in, because in the story of Paulo, he speaks. In the story of Santiago in Paulo's book, he speaks to the desert, he speaks to the wind, he speaks to the sun, and the sun brings him to the hand that wrote all, which is a metaphor for God, or a metaphor for eternal love, for spirit, whatever name you want to give it. And what Santiago realizes is that he now, Santiago, the boy, has that power of love in his own heart. That it isn't out there somewhere, that he himself is an alchemist, and an alchemist is somebody who has the power of unconditional love, and he says that. It's exactly what he says. And he has the ability to perform miracles. In this case, the miracle that was required was to turn himself into the wind. But what happens in doing that is that he transports himself from one side of the camp to the other, and that's symbolic. In fact, in the next edition of my book, I'm going to talk more about this, because looking back, I don't think I've expanded on this enough. I am going to expand on it. It is.
So this is an exclusive.
Yeah, there you go. That's the reason to buy the second edition as well as the first edition, by the way. Hint, hint. But it's going to represent. It does represent this shift from one level of consciousness to another, to the point that it literally feels that you've gone to sleep and you've woken up again, and everything looks the same, everything tastes the same, feels the same, but it isn't the same.
Yeah.
And I can't explain that. I struggle. I do it really poorly. It's not a good explanation, but it's true. And anybody that's been through it will just go, "Yeah, Colm, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's how it is." And that sort of metamorphosis, that turning from a chrysalis into the butterfly, can be a repetitive experience throughout life. And so
Definitely.
this isn't a once in a lifetime experience. Once you learn how to go into this red phase and to turn things and create miracles, turn things around, then it is a continuous process. And I personally, I just can't imagine life without it. Doesn't mean I don't go through hard times. Doesn't mean that bad difficult things happen to me and those I love. Of course they do. That's life. But
Yeah.
to be empowered in those situations with this power that we're talking about, the alchemist power, um, just gives you a yet another sword in your scabbard. It's a sword that can cut through the rubbish and cut through all the stuff that doesn't really matter, and enables you to really know that treasure in each moment, good and bad. So yeah, if ever we need alchemists, come on guys, come on everybody, we need as many alchemists as we can
We
get
do.
right now,
We
and there are
really
some
do. Yeah.
amazing alchemists out there. Some of the guys working in the hospitals around the world right now, I just feel so humbled for the sacrifice
Yes. Yeah.
and the alchemy they're performing day in and day out on behalf of people, saving lives. Incredible. Um, I feel so humbled by their actions.
Yeah, and it's amazing because at the beginning of this podcast, probably a lot of people wouldn't know what an alchemist is, but now they're probably listening and thinking, "Oh, I know so many alchemists," or "I am an alchemist," even.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, it's a beautiful way that you put it. I love the sword that cuts through all the crap. And I mean, finally, obviously, we're getting on now. I've got as much time in the world for you, and I would speak to you for hours and hours. And there's so many parallels that I've seen and that we haven't even discussed. But what actually? So I only just finished your book yesterday,
Oh,
and the most amazing part of it was the very end when I seen the word action. Now, anybody that has listened to my podcasts, I've done 12 podcasts prior to this, a very reoccurring theme throughout all of them is action. And it's all about taking action because none of this, Santiago, yourself, me, anybody, they would never achieve anything without actually taking action. So it goes back to the dream that Santiago had at the beginning. He could have just stayed a dream and he could have carried on being a shepherd for the rest of his life and actually probably fairly happily, but there was still something inside nagging at him that he wanted to do more. And we all are capable of doing more. We're all so much more capable than we actually even realize. And that reoccurring theme was you just need to take action.
we do. And action from a different place than probably we've taken action from before.
Hmm.
I see action quite often, especially in business, sitting in boardrooms, making decisions, helping brands. I've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world. I've had the privilege of seeing people who manage marketing budgets of millions and millions, and it makes you cringe when you see somebody who's acting out of fear, somebody who's acting out of panic. I'm not going to mention anything about what's going on in the UK right now, but when you and what comes out of that, is chaos. Um, there's no rhyme or reason to it, and it becomes destructive. That's not the kind of action, Richard, that you and I are talking about. So action has to come from a place of real solidity, of wisdom, of wanting the real best for the as an outcome, not just for ourselves, but for those that we're trying to help in that. But once we've got those qualifications under our belt, that's why we're doing this, then yeah, we can't just sit on our hands and say, oh, the universe will do it.
Hmm.
I don't have to do anything. It'll work out. Now, there's a half truth in that, is that yes, the universe will do it, but guess what? There's one missing piece of the jigsaw that the universe is just waiting for to as they say in Yorkshire, God helps those who helps themselves in a good way, in the sense that we are uniquely the tool that the universe needs to bring about change.
Yes.
It's our unique role in the whole of evolution, in the whole of all the matter that exists, whether it's animal or mineral. Even, as Santiago says to the sun, there's something I need to do that even you can't do. You think you're all powerful because your rays bring light and warmth and life and photosynthesis and all the, none of us would be here without you, sun. However, um, the universe has given us as human beings that unique role to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that's why we can't sit back. We have to act. And we will make mistakes. We will make wrong decisions. We will put our foot in it on a regular basis. But if it's, as they say, if, as Paulo, one of his quotes I was reading on his Facebook page the other day, the secret of life is to fall down 7 times, but to get up 8 times.
Yeah, I read that too.
So, and 9 times, and 10 times, and 11 times, and 12 times, and so on. We'll get it right eventually. And even if we don't get it perfectly right, that's because we're not perfect. But it's all about the heart, and it's all about intention. So action is based on having intention that will bring about a positive, a life-giving outcome that will create well-being. And if you want to be part of that in the universe, then if you need a metaphor, if you're looking for a framework to try and sort out your life and to give it some kind of pattern, then I do recommend the kind of alchemy I've talked about in my book, The Secret of the Alchemist. I mean, there is a pattern. I've tried others. I've tried some traditional religious metaphors and patterns, and they've worked quite well for me. But of all the ones I've worked with, then for some reason alchemy does seem to do it for me. It's understanding those phases: the black, the white, the red, and action, and the soul of the world, and universal love, and so that just kind of gives me something I can work with, and it goes back a long way. Alchemy, we estimate the kind of alchemy I'm talking about was probably practiced 5,000-6,000 years ago in Egypt, where the pyramids are now, ironically. And we have to be. I'm grateful to people like Professor Carl Jung, 100 years ago nearly now, who made the effort to resurrect the wisdom of the alchemists and understand what they were really talking about. It's a good job because everything they ever wrote was code and symbols, and there's no way I would ever have been able to decipher all of that. But Carl Jung did, and he genius, and so we can benefit from that. If you've not read any Carl Jung, there's a few of his books that you might want to look up that I recommend, or books about Carl Jung you might find even more easy to read.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know you've referenced a lot of his books in your book anyway, and a lot of the things that you're saying were deciphered from his alchemy, if you like, or understanding of it. So yeah, I think definitely there's something now after I've picked up on. I have to just say that your book is absolutely fantastic, and what you were saying about how you practice it, it is, I feel, a lot more simple to take aspects from your book to be able to take into your own life. It's like I talk about recipe books. If I was to buy a recipe book, I don't like to buy ones with complex ingredients in it and that I don't already have in the fridge. I like to have things that are in the cupboard and things that I can that it's more simple, manageable,
Practical.
and that's practical. That's the word.
Yeah.
That's exactly what people want. People don't want to perform actual alchemy, but what you're saying in your book and these phases that you talk about, so well put. And again, it doesn't have to be in the exact way you've done it.
No.
But if people can just take something from that and be able to implement that into their lives, that's what matters, even if it's just one small thing that makes their lives better. And that's what this podcast is about. So even without reading The Alchemist, which I highly recommend everybody does, they can still purchase your book, and they can probably get pretty much the whole gist of The Alchemist through your book, along with your own experiences and your sort of they can take self-help from that as well.
I have to. Can I just share my excitement? I'm busting with a bit of excitement.
Yeah, no, you've got to tell that.
Uh,
I was definitely going to come back around to that because this is the full circle now closing,
because there's this
as
little,
as was
yeah.
drawn in the sand.
So this is the little boy, everybody. Welcome to the little Colm. He's been super excited all day, and he has to tell everybody. So I'm going to let's let him do it. Today, my after 27 years of my meeting with Paolo, he discovered my book, which is being published on July the 31st on Amazon. Everybody, you can go to Amazon, The Secret of the Alchemist, Colm Holland. You can pre-order it. But the Daily Mail, the Mail Online, discovered my book today, and they did a major feature on it. And Paolo discovered it. Must have popped up on his radar because his name was mentioned or his photo was in the article. And he very lovingly posted about me and my book on his Facebook page and on his Twitter to the 14 million followers or whatever it is that he has. So that was a massive exciting moment for me. It's almost like the completion of a circle. You said something, Richard, before we started the podcast today. It's almost like it's gone full circle back to that initial meeting I had with him in the restaurant all those years ago. We've met again. And so today is a very precious day to me. I feel that I've been able to honor my alchemist, but also my alchemist has been able to acknowledge again, in a way, that I was his alchemist as well at a time when he needed somebody like me to believe in his book and to help it get out to the masses, rather than just a few people who may or may not have discovered it. So yeah.
It's an amazing story. It's fantastic, and I feel like you deserve everything that comes your way. You definitely deserve to be where you are now. And Paolo, it's just as you said, it's come full circle. It just seems, it is written, and yeah, I just wish that everybody listening to this would go and buy your book, read it, take something from it, and experience a better self after reading that book, or at least begin that journey as did Santiago in The Alchemist.
And then wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all write that book?
Oh yeah,
Because
definitely. We're all writing a book
it's
right now.
possible. Absolutely, there's no reason why. We may not get published, but if we can write the book of our life, and it's full of magic, that isn't that the kind of book we want to write for our lives?
Definitely. I think that's a great place to wrap it up, Colm. I just want to say, absolute pleasure having you on the show. I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Pleasure is all mine, Richard. Bless you. I'm going to make this day a milestone. This can be a milestone for me. Thank you. You took the time out to talk to me on a day that is a significant milestone in my life. So we'll both take that away from this podcast. Thank you.
Excellent. And I have a feeling that this will be a significant milestone in my own life too.
Bless you, Richard.